It's officially NFL Draft Day, and we have a lot of rumors to discuss the morning of the NFL Draft. Mason Graham, the defensive lineman from Michigan, could he fall to the Dolphins at pick number 13? The Dolphins, are they open for business to potentially trade down from the 13th overall pick and then target Malaki Starks? We'll talk about a rumor there. Plus, Jalen Ramsey, some trade rumors dropped on the Dolphins cornerback. We'll discuss that at the end of today's show. I am Nic Rohloff. This is Dolphins Today by Chat Sports. But make sure you are subscribed and make sure you join us for our round one stream. This is the thumbnail, so if you see this thumbnail on YouTube, that means we are live. We're going to go live 1 hour before the draft, so 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Central Time. It's going to be a lot of fun. Me and Justin Honore live for the entire first round, breaking down the news in the NFL and the Dolphins draft pick. All right, let's move over to Mason Graham and start with that because there have been multiple mock drafts over the last 48 hours that have had the Michigan defensive lineman going to the Dolphins at 13 overall, which has been quite the surprise considering that for most of this pre-draft process, he was labeled as the number one defensive lineman and someone that was going in the top 10 guaranteed. But it started with Peter Schrager's ESPN mock draft because he only does one mock draft the week of the draft. And he has been one of the most accurate mock drafters out there because he does it purely based off intel and what he's been told, not doing based off what he believes. And as you see, an interesting slide for Mason Graham to the Dolphins at 13. He's not the only one that had that, by the way, because this morning, Thursday, Albert Grier of Sports Illustrated, who also does just one mock draft, had Mason Graham going to Miami at 13. And there's been buzz around the NFL that Graham could be actually maybe the second defensive lineman off the board if a team falls in love with Ole Miss's Walter Nolan. Listen, Mason Graham would be a great pick for Miami, a player that we have not talked a lot about as an option for the Dolphins in the first round, just for the simple fact that we just assumed he was going to go number 5 to the Jaguars or even number 4 to New England a little bit. But because of how big the need is for Miami on the interior defensive line, Graham, if he falls to the Dolphins at number 13, would be an absolute home run pick. That would be great right there, and it would be awesome for Miami to add Graham, someone who has got really good production, someone who can get after the quarterback, stops the run, would be an excellent complementary player to Zach Sealer. And if he's there at 13, I just think there is no way the Dolphins could pass up on the Michigan D lineman. But let me know your thoughts. Do you think Mason Graham could fall tonight to the Dolphins at 13? I didn't think there was a world, but I do at least believe there's a slight chance. So I would be answering yes to this question since we've seen it happen in multiple mock drafts from respected NFL insiders and analysts over the last 48 hours. So let me know your thoughts down below. I tweeted this out actually on Wednesday morning when we saw Peter Schrager's mock draft come out. I said this. Chris Grier is on the hot seat. There's no doubt about that. He comes into this year on the hot seat. I think he would be thanking the heavens because this would be an all-time bailout if Mason Graham fell into his lap at 13. He did a horrific job making sure this defensive line room was in a solid spot going into the draft. All they have is Zach Sealer, Benito Jones, and Neil Farrell. They lost Calais Campbell. They lost Deshaun Hand. They haven't had a long-term answer in this room ever since Christian Wilkins left. And if Mason Graham somehow just fell to you at 13, I mean, you would have this position locked down for the most part over the next 6 seasons. You really would. Now, you still need some depth potentially in the middle rounds behind Sealer and Graham if you drafted them, but it would just be an all-time bailout for Chris Grier in this front office to have Graham added to this roster because you go from defensive line being a massive need in one of your weakest positions to Sealer and Graham being arguably one of the best duos in the entire NFL. All right, let's get over to the draft trade rumors now because it seems like Miami might also be open to trading back on night one of the NFL draft. Dianna Russini of The Athletic reported yesterday that the Dolphins are fielding calls for the 13th pick, and it's been widely reported that a lot of teams are looking to trade down, acquire more draft capital over the first 3 or 4 rounds of this 2025 NFL draft. Miami is doing that as well. Now, it takes 2 to tango, and someone would obviously have to move up, but this, to me, is the best option outside of Mason Graham falling. This is the best case scenario because if you don't draft Mason Graham at 13, that's fine. But all the other players that have been linked to Miami, whether it's Kenneth Grant, whether it's Malaki Starks, whether it's Will Johnson, Jahdae Barron, Derek Harmon, Walter Nolan, they may be available if you trade back from like 13 to 20 and you're able to get them, but also acquire more draft capital because a team like Denver wants to trade up for an Amari Hampton or maybe a tight end like Tyler Warner, Colston Loveland. So this, to me, is a best-case scenario for the Dolphins and Chris Grier if they do not have Mason Graham fall into their laps. And we'll talk about what a trade could look like in just a second. But we are sponsored by Game Time, the official ticketing partner of Dolphins Today by Chat Sports. Whenever I go to a live event, I get my tickets with Game Time, and you should as well. Whether it's the NBA playoffs, it does not matter. Game Time is the best way to get your tickets. And when you get your tickets on Game Time, they have the lowest price guaranteed. They have so many great features. You could save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy show, theaters. They have Game Time picks, which make last-minute ticket buying easier than ever by quickly highlighting the best deals in the stadium. All-in pricing, which shows you the total price of your ticket up front with no surprise fees at checkout. It just is the easiest ticket buying experience that you can possibly have, and I am all about easy. And if you are in the Miami local area, go to a concert this summer, whether it's Lady Gaga or Chris Brown, or you could take advantage this weekend by going to Game 3 or Game 4 for the Miami Heat versus the Cleveland Cavaliers. Saturday, Game 3, Monday, Game 4. Could be the last two games that Miami has at home this season. Take advantage, buy your tickets with Game Time today. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CHATSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CHATSPORTS for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Let's transition into more talk about this trade down because in Daniel Jeremiah's final mock draft that he put out on Wednesday evening, he actually mock drafted a trade down for the Dolphins. You see it here. They traded with Denver, that team that has been so rumored to move up. Miami goes from 13 to 20. They draft Malaki Starks at 20, which we'll talk more about that in just a second. But you see the Broncos moving up to take Colston Loveland, the tight end from Michigan. And he also did release what he thought a trade would look like if Miami did that. And this is what it was. The Dolphins received the 20th overall pick in the first round. They pick up the 51st overall selection, which is a second-round pick. Remember, Miami holds 48, so they would then have 48 and 51 in this scenario. And they traded 116 back to Denver. Now, some people might think that that is not enough for the Dolphins to trade back. I'm actually fine with that value because Miami has 2 4th-rounders, 2 5th-rounders. So you move back 7 spots in round 1 to get a second-round pick, and you still would have that lone 4th-rounder at the end of the round as well. To me, that is something very advantageous for Miami because let's just say they did go Malaki Starks in that mock draft with Daniel Jeremiah. Well, then you could then go defensive line and offensive line or defensive line and cornerback with pick 48 and 51. Grab a Benjamin Morrison, a Siobhan Revel, a Darius Alexander, a TJ Sanders, and walk away with Starks and 2 of those 4 players I just mentioned. Yeah, that's a pretty good haul for the Miami Dolphins. And it seems likely, I don't know how accurate it is, that the Dolphins could be eyeing Malaki Starks. One of the players that I think I was the highest on early on, you look at our first 3 or 4 mock drafts on the channel, I talked about Malaki Starks in depth a lot. Well, Daniel Jeremiah had him trading back and drafting him, and then so did CBS Sports' Jonathan Jones in terms of mentioning Malaki Starks and the Miami Dolphins. Because the CBS Sports Insider said that I'm not saying that Starks is the pick at 13, but word around the league has been the Dolphins have interest in Georgia safety Malaki Starks. And although we've talked a lot about corner defensive line for Miami in the first round, if it was a trade back or if even Miami stayed firm at 13 and took Malaki Starks, I really wouldn't be that upset. Like, would I be skeptical of the plan at corner, at defensive line? Sure, especially if it's not in a trade down. But Starks is just such a good football player. He's a Swiss Army knife that can play in the nickel, play free safety, can play in the box. I think he would be a home run Javon Holland replacement, someone that would thrive in Anthony Weaver's system. And I've often said I believe he is a top 5, top 10 player in this draft class in my own big board, in my opinion, regardless of positional value. just talk about football players, I think Malaki Starks is that good. Compared him to Brian Branch and how he slipped to the second round due to him being a safety because it's not the biggest positional value. I love Starks a lot, and I would not be that upset if he was the pick for Miami at 13 or if they traded back and took him at like 20, 21, somewhere in that range. But let me know your thoughts. One-word reaction if tonight we see in some capacity the Dolphins draft Malaki Starks out of Georgia. Let me know your one word down in the comment section. We'll close out the show with Jaylen Ramsey updates because Armando Seguero, the long-term beat reporter for the Dolphins, a lot of followers on Twitter, had a lot to say about Jalen Ramsey. The first update was apparently the reason why the Dolphins and Ramsey are going separate ways potentially is because the Dolphins went to Ramsey and asked him to take a pay cut. Remember, they gave him an extension last fall, and this year's contract is fully guaranteed. So Ramsey said no, obviously something he is very in his own right able to do, and that's why the Dolphins are looking to move on. Now, I'm shocked they asked for a pay cut because his cap hit is only $16 million this year, and it's really not that egregious of a contract this season, so I'm shocked they even went to him and asked for a pay cut. Now, Armando did say that Jalen Ramsey could remain with the Dolphins. It's not a foregone conclusion he's dealt, because if Ramsey ultimately decides he wants to stay in Miami and he takes a pay cut like Chris Grier asked him to do, well, then the Dolphins want to keep him. They just want him on a cheaper contract. Now, there has been 5 teams that have contacted Miami about a Jalen Ramsey trade, those teams being the Los Angeles Rams, Washington Commanders, Philadelphia Eagles, Atlanta Falcons, and, oh my God, I'm spacing. What was the Rams, Lions, Eagles, Commanders, Falcons? Those are the 5. So those are the 5 teams that have checked in on Ramsey, and then the report is that a 5th-round pick could likely be the compensation for Jalen Ramsey in a trade. I still believe that he will not be traded this weekend. I could be wrong, but I believe it will happen after the draft. The cap situation for Miami is so deadly if you trade him prior to June 1st that if they are going to deal the veteran and star corner, they simply cannot do it prior to June 1st. So, to me, this is something that's going to happen down the line. You'll see maybe those 5 teams that have checked in on Ramsey circle back if they don't meet their draft needs and get a corner that they like in the draft, and then we'll see how the trade talks progress from here. But I don't think it's going to happen this weekend. But we do have a loaded weekend here for the Dolphins, so make sure you hit that sub button and join the channel as we will have the top coverage on YouTube for the Dolphins draft selections live tonight, live tomorrow, live on Saturday with reactions to every pick the Dolphins make. So hit that sub button and lock us in for the weekend.